Hi, this is Tiffany Gasbarrini. I'm Senior Acquisitions Editor for Life Sciences Books at Johns Hopkins University Press, and I'm super happy to be here today with my author, Valerie Trouet. Dr. Trouet is the author of this very cool book that we published recently on the little known but critically important scientific field of dendrochronology. Valerie, it's so good to see you.
Same here, Tiffany. Thanks so much for inviting me and for interviewing
Yeah.
me.
This is fun times for me, so I appreciate your indulgence. I want to talk about trees.
I love
And I want
talking
to talk
about trees.
about, yeah, and I want to talk about the book. So both of those things. But I also have a couple of lightning round questions for you that I think your readers are desperate to hear, right? So here are my really important questions. Ready? Beatles or Stones?
Oh, stones. That's easy. All the way. Yep.
80s boy bands, yes or no?
No, no can do. Sorry. Yep.
We're still on the same page here. What is, oh, I know, Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Wars. Yeah, yeah. Especially now with Princess Leia and yeah, Star Wars.
It has gotten cooler. That's
Yeah.
definitely true. Yeah. General Leia to you.
True, very true. Sorry, yeah, that's kind of what I meant
General
to
Princess.
say, but yeah.
So a little bit closer to home, perhaps. I have always been really curious about the details of your field work, like while you're out doing your science amongst the trees, right? So, what's the grossest food you ever had to eat when you were out in the field?
A good question. I'm gonna say caterpillars,
Ooh,
fried caterpillars.
ooh, where were you at the time?
This was in Zambia. This is very early on when I was doing my PhD. I went to sample trees in Zambia, and the vegetation type, the Miamba woodland, it's locally it's really important because there's these caterpillars that grow on the leaves of the trees, and they're a very important source of protein for the local population, and so they fry them and then eat them. And so when we were there, at some point we were invited to try some of these caterpillars. It wasn't too bad. It just tastes fried.
Right, like you fry anything and it tastes like fry, as
Yeah.
opposed to, that's
Yeah,
probably
they weren't mealy or anything. They were actually kind of crunchy, so it wasn't too bad. Yeah, but it was still kind of
okay. I feel like my question has been answered. Even getting a little bit more closer to what I'm actually supposed to be talking to you about today. What's your favorite species of tree?
Yeah, that's easy. I love incense cedar trees. They grow in the Sierra Nevada in California for a number of reasons. One, because they're beautiful, and their wood is beautiful, and their wood smells fantastic. And two, because it's so when I moved from Belgium after my PhD to do fieldwork in California, and then I started dating those samples from California. A lot of them were incense cedars, and these were the first samples where that would go back 1,000 years that I ever sampled. Like 1,000-year-old tree would not be an exception. And so to me, having done fieldwork in Zambia, where most of the trees were no more than 100 years old, and coming from Belgium, where there are no trees over 500 years old, like just getting my hands on these randomly selected samples that were 1,000 years old was just, yeah, magnificent.
Cool. Yeah, I can see that. What's the oldest tree that you ever found in the field?
There might have been one there in the Sierra Nevada, but probably the Adonis, which is we found it in Greece. It's the oldest living dendrochronologically dated living tree in Europe, and it's 1,075 years old. So that would have been that one.
How old is the oldest tree that anybody's ever found in
Sampled?
dendrochronologically dated? Yes. So not
Just
including fossils,
over.
because I know fossils is like a whole.
Right. That's a different story. So living tree would be a bristlecone pine. They grow, the oldest ones grow on the border in the White Mountains on the border between California and Nevada. And the oldest one was 5,062 years old when it was sampled, which was in 2012, I think. So it must
Nice.
be about 8 years older
So was that 5,000 plus?
now. Yep.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, it's mind blowing to know that
Who
trees
found
have
that?
been. A colleague of mine in the treeing lab, unfortunately, Tom Harlan, unfortunately, he passed away since, but he had been doing research on bristlecone pines on that tree species for a long time. He spent a lot of his career doing that. And then towards the end of his career, he found that oldest living
Wow,
tree. And
that's
they
amazing.
actually, the exact location of the tree is actually kept secret, so because they don't want people to vandalize it or to go visit it. So yeah.
That's awesome too. Well, that's a really cool legacy. It's sad that he passed away, but sounds like it was an awesome adventure though.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Is there like, do you guys get mad at each other? Do dendrochronologists who go out and look for super old trees in the field, then like, are you guys, there like a contest amongst you where somebody finds one that's older and then you're mad and you're like, now I gotta go find it. I gotta find an older one.
A little bit, like I gotta say, so when we found a oldest tree in Europe that I was talking about in Greece.
Yeah.
So the same tree species, it's called Bosnian pine, also grows in Italy, and there's quite a lot of dendrochronologists in Italy, and they were a bit upset that they didn't get the oldest tree because they've been doing that research. I mean, they're also old trees, right? They're also 800, 900 years old, even 1,000 years old, just not
That's old.
1,075 years. And so then one group from Italy then published a paper where the stem of the tree was not older than ours, but they then sampled the roots of the tree and then claimed that the roots were older, and hence our tree was not the oldest tree and their tree was the oldest tree.
I
So
feel
there
like
is
as
there
someone,
is some competition.
yeah, the last name Gasbarrini, I'm allowed to say that totally sounds like something that would happen in my family. And also, I'm sorry on behalf of Italians everywhere.
I don't take it personally, and
So we covered a bunch of stuff that it was really just like goofy things that I wondered about when I was reading your manuscript, or that I've thought about as, our partnership has developed. But I do feel that for people who maybe don't know, like on the basic level, what dendrochronology is, and I understand actually that you're not just a dendrochronologist too, right? You're a dendroclimatologist, or even a paleodendroclimatologist. Can you sort of give us just a really basic, like, what is dendrochronology? Because when I signed up to your book, I barely knew. I said, oh, this is a really cool science. Maybe somebody should write a book about it. And that's how this whole thing started, right? So for somebody who doesn't know anything about it, how would you describe dendrochronology, sort of what it is and why it's important?
Yeah, so dendrochronology is the science that studies the rings in trees, the annual rings in trees. And so we use the information stored in these annual rings for various applications. I'm, as you mentioned, a dendroclimatologist, meaning that I use the rings in trees primarily to look at the climate of the past, to study the climate of the past. So if you have 1,000-year-old tree, like I just was talking about, that can give you up to 1,000 years of information of what the climate was like over the past 1,000 years.
Cool.
There's three main fields of applications of dendrochronology. So climatology, what I talked about, ecology, obviously we use tree rings to look at forest history, to, for instance, look at wildfires in the past, or how trees grow under different climate conditions and so forth. And then the third important application is archaeology. So when looking at the rings in trees, we are not limited to only living trees. We can really look at the rings in anything made of trees, in wood. So that can be wood from historical buildings, from musical instruments, from archaeological sites. As long as the pieces of wood that we look at have enough rings in them, we can use the information from those rings to, the primary purpose there is to date. We can use tree ring science dendrochronology to put a precise date on when the tree grew from which a piece of wood was made. And then even more than that, more advanced than that, we can look at where the wood came from. That, for instance, an artwork was made of, and that's called provenance, dendral provenance. So
Gotcha.
archaeology, ecology, and climatology are the primary applications of tree ring science.
Cool. With relation to what you do in climatology, so I mean, I think because I read the book, right? I mean, I know some things about why dendroclimatology particularly is important. But in one of those things is that I was always impressed with is the kind of connections that you're potentially able to make about the climate of the past and events in human history. And then even sort of like projecting out, right? Like this is the climate changed in this way, and so this is what happened. And then if the climate continues to change in that way, this is what else could happen, right? So in terms of both projecting and modeling forward, but also being able to get this new insight into history. And so you have some really cool stories in Tree Story, right, in the book about things that have happened in history and new insights that we have gotten as a result of the work that's been done in dendrochronology and dendroclimatology. Can you give us just a really quick, what's your favorite story like that in the book? I mean, maybe it's hard to pick one, like you can't
pick one, yeah.
Can't pick a kid, but so like what's the kid you love best, right? You're not supposed to do that. So what about one of your favorite ones?
Yeah, so I think one that, I mean, especially given the current circumstances of the corona pandemic that we're living through, one thing that struck me again now when thinking of the book is that you can actually see past pandemics, for instance, the Black Plague in Europe, not so much in the tree rings per se, but in the amount of samples that we've taken. So I mentioned that you can date archaeological samples using tree rings. And so if you make a timeline, so my colleague Willy Tegel in Germany is a dendroarchaeologist. He has dated more than 7,000 samples from archaeological sites and historical sites in Germany that cover the last 2,500 years. So for every, let's say, year or decade over the last 2,500 years, he knows how many samples he has dated to that year. And so in the if you look at that timeline, you can see a dip in how much wood was used in the decade of 1340 to 1350 when the Black Pest, when the pest of the plague hit Europe. So you can see that there's much less wood that was being used because they built much less because there was a plague, and so it was such a high percentage of the European population vanished, and so there was not much building activity. You can actually see that in the tree rings. And so I think about that because we're seeing some things, well, we're not seeing it in the tree rings, but the current equivalent of that is not, our main building material now is not wood, it is carbon dioxide, right? I mean, or a lot of our activity is related to carbon dioxide. And so you see a decrease in the amount of carbon dioxide emissions because of our current pandemic as well. So it's kind of the medieval equivalent of that. Have you seen in
Interesting.
tree rings?
Yeah. And so then that's one of those ways that we can see what happened in the past and then look at what happened now and make these connections in terms of, contemporary human societies and things that happened thousands of years ago. Um,
Right.
all in a
Right.
tree, all in the stories that trees tell, right? So
Yep. Yep.
I've been fascinated with this since the beginning, obviously, and that hasn't changed. So
Well, I'm glad.
um, happily, I still love the book. um, so two things that excited me from the very beginning about the book, additionally, on top of sort of just I think that the science is really cool, are that you have shared a vision that I had of this thing that I'm calling narrative science, right, which is about storytelling in science. And also you are very vocal in supporting women in science, particularly, and speaking out about women's experiences in science. And so I wondered, do you think that there's a particular power, right, or are there particular benefits that come from women scientists having the opportunity to specifically tell their stories the way that you were able to do in Tree Story?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I'll need to think about it a little more, but I do think that to tell good stories, you want to make connections between, for instance, the science that you're doing and your daily life outside of your science. That allows people to, connect their daily life to what you're doing in your science. And I do think, generally speaking, women are better at that. At
I agree.
making connections between different fields, and at thinking outside the box a bit. So
Right.
I think in that sense it might have helped me. Yeah.
I think too, so one of the things that was really compelling to me and that continues to be in terms of scientific publishing is that when I can help women that are working in science tell their stories, I hope that there's some sense in which it normalizes women's experiences in science and sort of gets people used to and more comfortable with the idea of women as authorities in scientific
Yeah.
fields, right?
Yep.
I mean, I think we've made lots of progress in a lot of scientific fields since I started doing this 25 years ago, right? I was very used to being the only woman in a room at a scientific conference. And I think that has changed, but I think, we need to continue to push that in terms of the public perception. So that's one of the things I'm always so grateful when women in science who honestly have a lot of stuff that they take on, unpaid labor in many ways, are able to take yet something else on to do a book. And it's just always, I'm both humbled and grateful for it, because I think that scientists like you that are able to see the value in that and take the time to do it are people who are going to push us forward, in terms of our understanding of how women contribute and how diversity in general contributes to, the value of scientific endeavor. So
Yeah.
thanks.
Thank you. Yeah.
I haven't told you lately, but thanks.
Right back at you. So.
um, so how did it feel to hold the finished book in your
Oh my
hands for the
God.
first time?
Uh, Amazing. Like I had tears in my eyes, obviously. I mean, it's so beautifully produced, but also to actually I mean, it looks like it's a real book, Tiffany. It's a real book. I know. Like it's actually, like, I wrote all this and
No, you
it's
didn't.
real, and then it's got these gorgeous figures that Oliver Uberti made, and it just came together so beautifully, and it makes it so real. I always thought when I was writing this, I had these visions of, like, one day, if I just keep going at this writing part, one day I'm going to be in an airport and go to whenever I'm in an airport, I go to the airport bookstore, and
Yeah.
my book is going to be there if all goes well. Obviously, I'm missing that now because I'm not going to any airports right now, but receiving this gave me a glimpse of what one day, hopefully, that will be like.
Yeah, I got a little sniffled up too, and I've been doing this for a living for a long time. So I can tell you that was legit uh very affecting, and I felt the same way. Just the synthesis of so much work and commitment and passion too. So I have it. Which way am I pointing? Hey. So I always have it in the background. All my family has it, and just I got friends from high school buying it and commenting on it. It feels good.
I also want to say I didn't like this is my first book. And I, you know, you came up with the idea for me to write this book, so I'm very grateful to that. But also, like, coming in at this not knowing anything about how university presses work, I've been so impressed with how many people have actually worked on this book, on all parts of it, and are still working at it. The promotion, the copy editing, all the editing you did, just like I get emails from so many people at Johns Hopkins who all are working on so hard on a different component of this book. Like, yes, my name's on it, but there's so much behind the scenes that I didn't realize. So I'm really grateful to all of you for making this happen.
Thank you. It definitely takes a village. That's
a big village.
And when you're at a smaller press too, because I've worked at very big publishing houses and smaller presses, it's a more personal experience, I think, too, so that you're talking to the people, the copy editors and the PR people and the people in marketing and the cover designers, and you don't get that in a big press. So I think that's been for me too, even coming from environments where I work for big corporates, that's been so satisfying. So I think it's nice that you get to have that team in a personal way and see that they're on your side.
It's amazing.
Yeah, so I'm happy. I'm happy when you're happy.
Very much so.
So I just have a couple more questions for you, talking about our families. I remember very clearly early on in the book that you had said that your mom was not particularly thrilled with the idea of you taking up a career in tree rings, and being that, it's right around Mother's Day here in the States. My mom's on my mind. And apparently your mom's on my mind too. Has she changed her mind? Did she see the book? How does
she has seen the book. I just called her yesterday when I heard I got promoted. So yeah, she's very, very proud, and she's a very big fan now. And I think she does. And I must say, like, yes, at the very beginning, she was hesitant about this idea of tree rings. I remember trying to convince her that it was a good idea for me to go to Africa and study tree rings by pulling an analogy. Like, my dad was a professor as well as a scientist, and he was a pharmacologist. So he developed medicines. But the technique he used, a lot of the techniques he used included mice, right? He used mice to study the effect of the medication that he was developing. So I told my mom, like, tree rings, it's just like the mice. It's a method to get to a bigger, to a bigger problem, to a bigger issue. Now, I ended up building a career out of the mice, so it's a little different. But I think she's very thrilled to have seen the book and to follow my career. So
all right, that makes me happy. Say hi to your mom for me.
I will.
If you think about it. So Johns Hopkins is thrilled with the success of Tree Story, and I myself am thrilled with the success of Tree Story. I think we're publishing it in a difficult time where science is under fire. People are anxious, and so when we have these bright spots and these cool stories and these successes that make it so people understand more how science is important and is helpful and is even fun, right? I mean, it's not like some old guy in a lab coat somewhere with tweezers and like something that will never be applicable to anybody's lives. But trees are all around us. They're telling stories about thousands of years in the past and thousands of years into the future. And so I feel like to make it manifest that science is meaningful is super important in this time. I think that you did a fantastic job with that. We're really happy at the press, and I just wish you all the success in the world going forward. And I have to plug, I have to say, I'm pretty sure you're in the New York Times literary section on Sunday. So anybody out there watching this, pick up a copy of the Times. But thank you. Thanks for taking the time to talk to me today. And thank you so much for all your Herculean efforts on behalf of the book. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. This book would not have happened without you, Tiffany. I cannot repeat that enough. It would not have happened without me, but it also would not have happened without you. So
good on us. Thanks, Valerie. Hopefully I'll speak to you again soon.
I look forward to it.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.